Eric Jon Phelps, who has crafted a book. It's more than a book. It's an indictment and an expose and all sorts of things, called Vatican Assassins. Many of you have heard of the book. Maybe you heard Eric's first visit on this program. It is a stunning book which rips open all sorts of secrets, as it were, exposing a power structure on the planet that many people will live this life and maybe their next life and never hear a word about. It is quite an amazing story, and welcome back, Eric. How are you?
I'm fine, Jeff, and yourself?
It's busy. It's an amazing time we live in, as you well know.
Mm-hmm.
The book Vatican Assassins, when was it actually released and how is it doing? This is really a truly controversial work you've put together.
It was released last July of 2001, and it's been out for nearly a year, and we printed 5,000 copies. And I think about half of them have been sold. It's some places it's very hard to get it into, like England. If it's not addressed with a kind of juvenile signature, it will be returned. And so it will not be sold outright in the open at Barnes & Nobles or Borders, but some of those outlets will order it, and some of them won't.
They won't stock it, though?
No.
Well, why am I not surprised? It's a book that obviously has been talked about a great deal. You have thrown a big rock in a rather small pond, as they say.
I just got an email from a black Muslim today who took the book into Harlem, and he confronted Minister Farrakhan. What was his relationship with the Jesuits? And he asked him that question 12 times during a 2-hour interview, and Mr. Farrakhan did not give him an answer.
Now what?
So this guy is real interested on the Masonic connection of Mr. Farrakhan with the Jesuit order.
Wow. All right, before we get into the book itself and some of the amazing history which bears directly on what's going on today in many cases, I want to get your overview on the current conflict, the never-ending conflict in the Middle East, and the Vatican's interests in the Holy Land and how those interests are certainly being expressed in some of the violence, at least, we're seeing in the news all the time. Tell us your viewpoint on all that.
Well, going into the past, particularly in the Crusades, the purpose for those Crusades, launched by the Pope, was to take Jerusalem for himself out of the hands of the Muslims, that he had originally created the religion of Islam, according to Dr. Abu Rivera. But the Crusades failed, and Jerusalem was in the hands of Islam until Allenby took Jerusalem from the Turks in 1917. England had been in the hands of the Jesuits since 1800 with King George III, all throughout the reign of Victoria. And then ultimately, when Allenby took Jerusalem, the Jesuits took Jerusalem. Prior to that, just maybe 20, 30 years prior to that, they had ignited the Dreyfus Affair. And out of the Dreyfus Affair was born the Zionist movement to return to their homeland.
Okay, talk to us a little bit about the Dreyfus Affair. And I'm at least passingly familiar with it, but many people are not. It's a very famous name, Dreyfus, the Dreyfus Affair. And upon the Dreyfus Affair turns the big, well, it's a big screw, as it were. It gets going from then on. Tell us how that brings us all the grief we're dealing with today.
Okay. The Dreyfus Affair took place in the late 1800s, in the 1890s actually, when a Jewish French captain in the French army was accused of treason. He was tried, he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to Devil's Island for 10 years. After 10 years, his case was reconsidered, and he was found not guilty, which left France in a lot of shame over that. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Raymond Poincaré, who was an attorney, pointed out, and you can find this in Pierre Van Passen's great work, Days of Our Years, was that the Jesuits were behind the Dreyfus Affair. This ultimately led to their expulsion in 1901 from France, as they had already been expelled by Gambetta in 1880. Uh-huh. But at the trial of the Dreyfus Affair, Theodor Herzl was a reporter, a correspondent from Austria, and it was there that he used the Dreyfus Affair as the impetus to start the movement called Zionism to bring the Jews back to Palestine. So the Dreyfus Affair is the backbone for the creation of Zionism and the return of the Jews there, and also the Balfour Declaration and so on.
The Balfour, B-A-L-F-O-U-R Declaration was I guess the last century. That was the real genesis of our current issue in the Middle East, the Balfour Declaration.
That's right.
That was the political green light for all of it to transpire.
That's correct. Now, we have to realize that the papacy hates the Jewish race. The great challenge for the Pope in his quest to be the universal monarch of the world are the Jewish people. They have to be annihilated. So the purpose of Zionism is to destroy the Jewish race, to get all the Jews back to Palestine for the purpose of killing them all there. That's the real reason for it. So to do this, the English, being controlled by the Jesuits, and particularly at Balfour, they created the Balfour Declaration, and then the Jews were able to start to go back to Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately they fomented World War II, which resulted in the Jewish Holocaust.
They fomented. Who do you mean they?
I mean the Jesuit order fomented World War II, yes. Because Hitler had a concordat with the Pope, Mussolini had a concordat, Franco had a concordat, and Stalin had a secret concordat.
All right, what is a concordat?
A concordat is a treaty between the papacy and a nation, whereby the Pope extends certain privileges and immunities to that nation in exchange for certain duties and obligations of that nation.
Okay.
And in Mussolini's Italy, one of the duties and obligations was the outlawing of Protestantism. You could not read a Protestant Bible. And one of the duties and obligations under Hitler's regime, and remember, the Knight of Malta, Franz von Papen, negotiated the Concordat on behalf of Hitler with the Pope. And one of the duties and obligations out of that was ultimately the creation of the SS by Heinrich Himmler, whose father was a Jesuit coadjutor. His father was a professor who tutored Prince Heinrich Wittelsbach of Bavaria, who was the most powerful monarch in all of Catholic Bavaria. And Himmler's father's brother was a Jesuit canon who later became a high officer in Himmler's SS, in fact, in the SD. And according to Edmund Paris, Himmler's uncle was the real master of the SS, and he was the favorite of the Jesuit general, Count Ratajkowski.
Now, so we don't leave anybody behind, Eric. Just for formality's sake, tell us what Jesuits are and how they figure in with the Roman Catholic Church. Some people who are not Catholics don't know.
Okay. The Dark Ages had ruled for 1,000 years. The Pope had been the king of the nations throughout Europe. He was supreme over all the monarchs. Then came the Reformation. The Reformation resulted in whole nations breaking away from what is called the temporal power of the Pope. The Pope claims to have two powers, represented by two swords, if you see it on the papal flag. One sword is the spiritual power, meaning that he has the right to dictate the religious belief of every man on earth. The second key is his right, called the temporal power, is his right to rule the governments of every nation. And this is what he exercised throughout the Dark Ages. And when the Reformation happened, whole nations broke away. Germany broke away, Holland, Denmark, England, almost France, and some others. And they assumed what we would call national sovereignty today.
Sure.
So in other words, the Pope wasn't dictating terms to those governments. When that happened, in 1540, Ignatius Loyola started the Jesuit order for the purpose of restoring the temporal power of the Pope over all these Reformation nations, destroying the Protestant Reformation, and bringing the whole world back under the universal obedience and worship to the papacy.
They were the Pope's army, really?
They were his army. They're called the Light Horse of the Pope, the Light Corps, the Marine Corps, the Pope's bodyguard, the Pope's penholders. Without the Jesuit order, there is no real enforcement of the Pope's temporal power.
How many Jesuits on the planet today? In round numbers, do we know? It's not a huge number, but it's a very intense group of people.
According to Alberto Rivera, who was an ex-Jesuit who got saved, came to know Christ as his Savior, he says that it was 100,000 in his book, and he came out in 1969.
Mm. Okay. This is a hardcore group, folks, and we'll pursue this topic with Eric Jon Phelps, and lots to learn tonight. This is a real glimpse of history, the likes of which you're likely not to hear anywhere else. Vatican Assassins is the book, and we'll continue after this. Eric Jon Phelps, his book Vatican Assassins, his website vaticanassassins.org. And for those of you who might sit back with an incredulous look on your face, you have to take this for what it's worth to you and start applying the percentages. What if 90% of what Eric says is in fact accurate? What if 50% is accurate? How does that affect you? What does that mean to you in your world? You take what you can and do with it what you will. We're going to put it out for you, though. This is a man of great scholarship who has obviously done his research. Okay. This issue of Zionists and Jews. Great confusion now, of course. And when many people criticize the current affairs and policies of the Sharon government, they're immediately besieged and set upon by those who would throw the old shop-worn collar of anti-Semite around. To you and your background, it must look doubly absurd. People don't understand the difference between Jews, Zionists, government policy. It's very muddled and muddied. And, of course, that's the game. That's the way it's played. So go back, if you would, and explain Zionism in terms of how it is being used, in your view, to bring Jews all together so they can be, apparently, once and for all extinguished.
To answer that question, I have to go back to Ishmael and Isaac.
All right, that's a ways back, but we got time.
It will take a minute. Isaac was the natural son of Abraham. Ishmael was the son of Abraham through Hagar. The promise that God gave to Abraham went through Isaac to Jacob to his 12 sons. That promise included a land promise that you can find in Genesis 15 and Genesis 17. That land promise given to the physical descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob has never changed. So the Jewish people have a right to that land. They also have a right to be governed by their own patriotic people, which does not include the Zionist government. The Zionist government, as we know it today, was started by the Jesuits, and it is controlled by the Jesuits. Shimon Peres, for example, deeded over the old city of Jerusalem in 1993 to the Pope, according to the Time newspaper. This was utter treason to the Jewish people.
And there's supposed to be a document stating so?
Absolutely. It's easily provable. My friend Joel Bannerman, who wrote Crimes of the President about George Bush, can prove it along with Barry Chamish. So this is one of the indications that the Sharon government, the Perez, Chaim Weizmann, Ben Gurion, all of them were working for the papacy.
And
all
still are.
And still are. Just like the PLO leadership, just like Yasser Arafat. He's a Masonic, Islamic Freemason.
Is he actually a Mason?
Yes. All those Islamics there. The Hussein dynasty is Masonic. That's Saddam Hussein. The Saud dynasty is Masonic.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Right. And the Bin Laden dynasty is Masonic. And Bin Laden's mother is a Jew.
Now, that is a shock.
Isn't it? Just found that today, out a couple days ago.
How do we validate something like that?
Because it can be proven by the people that live in Israel that they knew his mother. Joel Bannerman and Barry Chamish can both prove it.
Is that why he's still alive today?
No, he's still alive because he's a creature of the CIA.
Well, he's been our boy, I know. So was Saddam Hussein and how many others. They were all on the payroll and still are on the payroll in some way.
Right, all of them since 1932 or the early 1900s when that whole fiasco was set up. It was set up by the British Empire, controlled by Freemasonry, and thus the tool of the Jesuits. They set up that whole Middle East schematic over there. Iraq, Iran.
British Petroleum, all of it. They cut the map up into pieces.
However they wanted to do it, that's right.
Yeah.
So they control both sides. That's important for us to see. And the Palestinian people although I do not believe they have a right to that land, and they would be easily assimilated into Jordan and Syria unless we could end this agitation. They want this agitation to continue, so they want the Israelis to give up the West Bank so that there can be fighting near Jerusalem, so that in this fight that will involve American troops there, the Dome of the Rock can be destroyed, that can be blamed on America, and then America can have a jihad, a fanatical Muslim invasion.
Wow, all right. There is some talk about, allegedly, Sharon would like to move out all the Palestinians, push them across to Jordan. Just clear them out.
Well,
that wouldn't make sense with what you're saying, though.
No.
Because it would end the agitation.
Well, it would end the agitation, that's correct. But we also have to remember this, that the Islamic leaders there in the Middle East, they don't want the Palestinians moving in their countries. They will not allow them in. So we see
what would your solution be? How would you enfranchise the Palestinians? They have a right under the sun to some place to call home, don't they?
Well, the Palestinians are Arabs, and their brothers are in Jordan, and Jordan is just a stone's throw away from the cities that they occupy.
They wouldn't call themselves Jordanians, though.
Pardon?
Most of them wouldn't call themselves Jordanians. They call themselves Palestinians.
Well, they can call themselves that, but again, would I have to go back to the Bible and say that the Jewish people have the right to the land. God gave that to them, and it's never been reneged upon.
Okay, so Perez and Sharon, Zionists that they are, working, as you suggest, for and through the papacy,
yes, are
continuing to turn the heat up, hoping for a conflagration. I would assume, is that what we're getting at here?
Well, what we're getting at, I believe, is that we're going to have a big conflagration, like you said, that will result in U.S. troops being stationed there near Jerusalem. Because the Dome of the Rock has to be destroyed, but it can't be destroyed by the Jewish people. They couldn't stand an Arab attack. It has to be destroyed on the old enemy of the Jesuit general, the Protestant, liberal, heretic people of the United States.
Okay. Lots to think about. Very controversial material. Fascinating reading, I guarantee you that. Vatican Assassins, the book, and my guest, Eric Jon Phelps. So Zionists are not Jews always. You don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. It's a political cadre. Is that one way to put it, Eric?
Absolutely. The Jesuits are the greatest Zionists in the world. The High Jesuits of the Fourth Vow are the authors and promoters of Zionism. They're financing Zionism through their Federal Reserve Bank.
How is it that the Zionists have gotten away for so long with jumping on anybody who criticizes them or their policies as being anti-Semitic? That's a club they pull out and batter people with. They've been doing it for, the better part of a century now. I think those days may be coming to an end, but they've gotten away with it for a long time.
Yes, they have, and it's been too bad. I think with the most recent treason that's gone on with Shimon Peres and Yossi Beilin in '93 with beating over the old city, I think many Jewish people are waking up to the fact that the Zionist government is not good for them, and that they rule on behalf of a foreign monarch.
I have received so many emails from our Jewish listeners here and in Israel and around the world who do not agree with what's going on in their country. They feel like their country is not their country anymore, many of them.
Absolutely.
And in many ways it isn't.
No, they don't
co-opted, yeah.
They don't have any say in their government, just like we don't have any say in ours.
That's what I hear. Exactly what I hear. Same thing. Okay, now, I'm going to go back to the issue of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. I don't think we could overstate the importance of Jerusalem to the Catholic Church or the Western Christian world. Therefore, would it be fair to say, in your estimation, that you don't foresee a nuclear event necessarily in Jerusalem or any of the critical holy places there?
Absolutely not. Jerusalem has to endure. This nation will endure. It will not be destroyed until their Messiah returns. But I do foresee the destruction of the Dome of the Rock through some sort of military action. You see, then the Jesuit general, I believe, will use the American forces for this, so that he can create a war between the peoples that are his greatest enemies, and those are the Islamic peoples and the heretic Protestant and liberal American peoples or of Western culture. If he can get them to war with each other and kill each other, he benefits, and his Zionist government in Israel benefits, because he wants the Temple Mount, he wants the Dome of the Rock destroyed so he can rebuild the temple for himself.
Right. All right. Now, taking the dome out would not be hard at all. I mean, it could be done any number of ways. An F-16 could be loaded with high explosives. It could be remote controlled and flown right into it, and they could blame a crazy pilot. I mean, that's an easy thing to do. We've heard that scenario before. It's doable. There's
some talk that the Bin Laden construction company has been mining underneath it and could already have put charges in it underneath the dome. As you know, the Bin Laden family are the contractors for the Islamic holy places.
Right.
They do all the contracting work for Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem.
Do you foresee a wider war in the Middle East?
Absolutely.
Will it
We're going
ignite
to
with our?
it.
Well, I was going to say, will it ignite with our invasion of Iraq?
Yes. They're calling for 250,000 American troops to be there. I really believe that that's nowhere near the total. We'll probably have anywhere from 500,000, maybe even to 1 million in that area. We don't know what's going on anymore. We don't get the facts from Afghanistan. We don't know how many Americans have actually died there. That's right. I have never seen more blanket propaganda, and not just America. That's the way business is done now. The British people the same way. They don't get the truth. No, the Pope is going to continue to pursue his goals over there, and I believe two of the other goals are going to be the destruction of Mecca and Medina. If Mecca is destroyed, then 1.5 billion Muslims will rile, and they will rise up as one. That's right, and the Central Intelligence Agency has already brought in hundreds of Islamic terrorists, it's part of the Black Folks Islamic terrorist community, with their biological agents, and are ready to do their damage as soon as that would happen, which would then be turned into creating a national paranoia, the justification of relocation camps, the power of the Office of Homeland Security under the Jesuits, Tom Ridge. Is he a Jesuit or a Jesuit agent? He is a Jesuit temple. He is a temple coadjutor. He works on behalf of the order. I can't trace his membership to the Knights of Columbus, but he's most definitely a temple coadjutor because he was governor of Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is just about entirely Roman Catholic, except the southeast here, which there are a few Protestant counties. Timetable. That's hard. A week, a month, a year? For what, the Dome of the Rock being? That's the big. Well, I mean, let's take the destruction of Mecca. If that comes to pass, as you suggest, 6 months, a year, it seems to me we're sitting right on the edge of anything right now. I think so too. I think we have a series of suitcase nukes that are placed in the United States and can be detonated at the particular harmonic moment whenever the Jesuits want to do that. If they would just detonate one. For example, I think something big is going to happen in Los Angeles. It'll either be a suitcase nuke or it'll be biological warfare. Because let me interrupt here, because Los Angeles is so big and truly is not of irreplaceable strategic import. That's correct, but it is a strategic site in that the Chinese are planning their massive invasion into the West Coast, which they're practicing for right now in the Straits of Formosa. Well, they better get Taiwan first, hadn't they? They will. They'll take Taiwan, and they'll sweep probably down into Malaysia. They'll probably take Australia because now it's disarmed. And they'll make their sweep up to North America. They take Australia in any case, but sure. Go ahead. And when they land, they're going to be landing in their old port in Long Beach, which was once a U.S. naval base, but now it's been leased by Costco. And Costco is considered part of the Chinese Navy, and they have 600 merchant marine ships around the world. Sounds like some of them presently bringing arms right up through the Panama Canal, which they control, into Cuba right now. Jenin and Castro are good friends. So if the population of Los Angeles is greatly decreased, that will enable them to have an easier landing in Long Beach.
All right. Very provocative material, to put it mildly. Eric Jon Phelps is my guest. We'll be right back with more. I'm Jeff Rense. That's R-E-N-S-E, as in Rense.com. And do stop by the website. Take a look and try and help yourself through as much information as you can. It's always there for you around the clock. Okay, we're back. Hour number 2. I'm Jeff Rense with Eric Jon Phelps. This is, again, a book called The Vatican Assassins, which you really ought to read. It is an imposing work, to put it mildly. We've heard a lot of very interesting things in the last hour, many more facts and historical insights ahead. Eric, anything you want to add to our discussion of last hour here to kind of tie that up?
Oh, let me give the number if the people want to order the book, if I may.
Oh, please do. I was going to ask you that. Go ahead.
Okay. If you'd like to order the book Vatican Assassins, you may call Wisdom Books and Press at 1-877-280-2866. It's 1-877-280-2866. Regular California business hours from 9 to 5.
Okay, that's 877 toll-free 280-2866. Wisdom Books. Ask for Vatican Assassins. In May, this month, the 25th and the 26th in Santa Clara, California, a big conference underway, Conspiracy Conference. The website is conspiracycon.com, and Eric Jon Phelps will be speaking there, one of the featured presenters. Ticket information 209-832-0999, May 25 and 26 in Santa Clara, California, 209-832-0999. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Okay, what about our discussion last hour? Anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I would. I would like to add that the issue on Jenin, that we're told about this massacre, that my contacts there said it was not a massacre. There were 23 Israeli soldiers killed. There were 200 Palestinian terrorists killed, 1,000 prisoners taken. And one of the reasons I believe that the press, the international Jesuit press, was touting this as a massacre was to create anti-Jewish fury in the United States for the purpose of driving the American Jews out of this country and back to there, as well as in Europe.
Eric, try as I might, I can't see American Jews packing up and going back to Israel. I just can't see it.
They're going to pull it off, Jeff. That's why on my website I offer to help American Jews to leave, because they're safer in Israel than they are here.
Well, the Los Angeles terrorist target concept has long been one that I have felt was viable. It's a big, wide open place, no way to defend it. Forget it. And again, a lot of expanse, a lot of people that could be sacrificed. You're not losing Wall Street. You're not losing the nation's capital. But what an incredible impact on the psyche of America for any city to have a nuclear weapon exploded in it. It would be, as you say, an instant trigger toward, well, they won't call it martial law, but it'll be the same thing.
Sure. And it would also excite Americans to sign up in the Army and the Armed Forces.
They'd be wrapped around the block.
Run in droves over to that area to ultimately be betrayed and sacrificed by our own military commanders after they have done the dirty work of the Jesuit general.
Aren't we actually in a time and a place now where we really don't, as a populace, we really don't know who's behind terrorism and terrorist attacks? We can't be sure. We may never know exactly who does what to whom. We'll just be told, and we'll have to accept it on that basis. Now, you may have an idea who's doing it, but the average person really never will.
No, because the average person, all he ever hears is from the typical control press.
Sure.
It's designed to keep us in the dark.
Yeah, the major networks will tell them, and that'll be it. But I think a lot of them know that there's more to it than that, but they won't know where to look unless they can look perhaps to your book or hopefully to my website and others that do a really fine job of trying to bring more reality news to people.
One of the benefits of Vatican Assassins is I develop a whole network of who was involved in the Kennedy assassination. When you see that same network that existed then exists today. The power never decreased. In fact, it increased. So when
a lot of people would say, wait a minute, Eric. Jack Kennedy was a Catholic. What are you talking about? Why would they kill their own, the first Catholic president in the history of the United States?
They kill their own all the time.
And I was going to say, they haven't stopped them before, has it?
Right. And furthermore, Cardinal Spellman was the head of the Knights of Columbus, and he sacrificed one of his own Knights of Columbus, which was John F. Kennedy, because Kennedy went against the power of the Jesuit general in that he sought to end Cardinal Spellman's Vietnam War, and he sought to end the CIA, which the CIA at the top was a continuation of the SS, ran by the Knights of Malta. And the head of the CIA in the days of Kennedy, after Dulles was relieved of his command, who was a 33rd degree Freemason, the head after him was John McCone, who was a Knight of Malta. Today, the head of the CIA is George Tenet, another Knight of Malta, with Anthony Zini, one of the big drug traders, carrying on the Black Pope's international drug trade. George Tenet and his CIA brought down the World Trade Center with internal implosions, just as our CIA killed Kennedy under McCone. The man who's the head of the Knights of Malta in the United States is the most powerful archbishop, and that is the Archbishop of New York. In Kennedy's day, it was Spellman. In our day, it is Edward Cardinal Egan. That is the man who is responsible for this World Trade fiasco and the Pentagon fiasco, and ultimately this war. And that's why they created this terrible scandal in the Catholic Church, which I have no doubt that this pedophilia and homosexuality has been going on for years. But the Jesuit press deliberately brought this out so that they could get the 13 cardinals back to Rome behind the secret walls of the Vatican to have a war council. They're not reforming anything. This is a council of war as to how they're going to proceed against us. And those 13 cardinals are the most powerful individual men in this country.
So they sacrifice a few priests, they throw a little mud around.
Right.
Okay, now the council, they've had it.
They've had it. It took 2 days, and they're back. And one of the most powerful cardinals who went there is Cardinal Avery Dulles of Fordham University, who's a Jesuit, whose father, whose uncle, was Allen Dulles, the former head of the CIA. Avery Dulles is a very powerful man.
The Dulles family continues to be a powerhouse. Interesting. The Dulles boys.
Yes. Yes, well, CFR, Dulles was very much involved in CFR. The CFR is the Jesuit general's secret government over the American government. Is orchestrated through the Archbishop of New York. The St. Patrick's Cathedral, from that palace from where the Archbishop rules, is across the street from Rockefeller Center.
Palace, interesting concept.
Yes.
What was it about John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy that didn't mesh with the Jesuits and this whole thing?
Well, Kennedy would be considered a liberal Roman Catholic. And pursuant to the Jesuit oath, they put to death Protestants and liberal Catholics. That's why during World War II, the Jesuits used their SS to kill some 2,500 Catholic priests because they were against the Nazis. So they eliminated them in Dachau and a few of the other camps. They killed their own liberals. So they did the same thing to John Kennedy when he sought to end the Vietnam War. He sought to end the CIA. He also was against the Cardinals' voucher system of using tax money to support Catholic schools. Kennedy wasn't going to do that. He was against the Federal Reserve System, which is run by the Jesuit order through the Knights of Malta, because the stockade class holders are banks like Citibank, Morgan Guarantee Loan and Trust. They're all run by the Knights of Malta. One of them was Francis X. Stankard, who was head of Chase Manhattan Bank, who sent John J. McCloy to be on the Warren Commission. And McCloy was the Secretary of War under FDR, who refused to bomb the railroad tracks to Auschwitz.
Now, one of the labor camps, work camps, or death camps was ever interdicted with a single bombing raid that we know of.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And that's why I show in my book that all the intelligence agencies, the SS, the OSS, the NKVD, the British SIS, they all work together. They all dovetailed in the Vatican.
Who was supposed to win World War II? Was Hitler supposed to win, or was communism supposed to win?
Russia was to win, not Hitler. But the purpose of Hitler, he was to destroy the Protestant Reformation in Germany, which he succeeded in doing. Protestantism ended for the most part.
Yeah, if his scientists had come up with the atomic bomb first, the war might have ended much differently.
Well, true.
They did make some calculation errors, I understand, and it just didn't get it done, but they were certainly trying.
No, the Jesuits ran the intelligence of the Third Reich.
Why didn't all right. Why didn't Adolf Hitler cross the Channel and neutralize England when he had the opportunity?
Wonderful question, because he was not allowed to. And any one of his generals that wanted to stop, for example, the landing on Normandy, particularly Rommel, was brought back to Germany and executed, because Rommel knew they were coming at Normandy. Why did Hitler give the order for the Germans to stop at Dunkirk and not annihilate 350,000 English?
Mm-hmm.
Because that war had to continue, and there were more Jews to kill in the East. They hadn't purged Europe of its Jews yet.
Zionist involvement in World War II, we'll talk about that with Eric Jon Phelps and get his views on one of the most controversial aspects of our times as we continue after the top of the hour. Vatican Assassins is the book. It is a very controversial publication, as you're hearing, and the website is vaticanassassins.org. See you in a few.
USA Radio Network News, I'm Jay Sharon. His Likud party has voted to reject the creation of a Palestinian state, a move he feared would increase international pressure on Israel and tie his hands in potential negotiations. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, some 1,000 people have attended the first services at the Church of the Nativity since the end of the standoff. U.S. lawmakers speaking out on Yasser Arafat, Indiana Democratic Senator Evan Bayh says he doesn't have much confidence in the Palestinian leader.
I think his word is not good. Unfortunately, there's no one else to deal with at this time. The understandable and defendable Israeli actions to defend themselves have had the effect of increasing his popularity among his own people.
Arizona Republican John Kyle says Arafat has been given numerous chances to bring about a ceasefire.
If history is a guide, Arafat is not a reliable partner. I suspect that the administration is attempting one last time to see whether Arafat can perform, and I think the view is that if he cannot, then clearly he'll have to be moved aside.
Authorities say a major wildfire north of Los Angeles, now 60% contained. The blaze has destroyed 4,000 acres and 2 outbuildings. Some 150 residents have been evacuated, and 2 firefighters have suffered minor injuries. This is USA Radio News. Jimmy Carter has become the first American president to visit Cuba since Fidel Castro came to power in 1959.
My wife and I are delighted to be in Cuba. I believe it was 14 years ago when President Castro and I met in Caracas that he first invited me to come to this country. Still in English, I would like to express my personal thanks for the words of welcome that were extended to me by President Castro.
During the visit, Carter will tour various labs, offices, and schools, as well as holding talks with Castro. NATO peacekeepers say they found 2 hidden ammo caches containing 5,000 mortar shells and explosives in factories in the southern Bosnian town of Mostar. It is the second such find in 2 weeks. Secretary of State Colin Powell says he's confident the U.S. and Russia will sign an arms deal later in the month. Powell says President Bush will go to Moscow to sign that treaty. It would cut weapons by up to 2,200 on each side. This is USA Radio News. One of the alleged sexual abuse victims of a Boston area priest says the Catholic Church should provide immediate help to victims. He says they should establish a victims hotline and funding for psychiatric therapy.
The very least the church can do, even as it cries poor mouth, is to make funds available on a general level for the victims and the families of victims who continue to suffer monstrously.
Arthur Austin, appearing on CBS's Face the Nation, he says the pain affects the entire family, too.
This is an issue that people are overlooking completely, is the families of victims, the impact that this has on families of victims. They have nowhere to turn for help, and the impact on them is just colossal and endless.
Tragedy in Tampa, Florida. A theme park worker there has lost an arm after being attacked by a 12-year-old male lion. Jason Walker with news on the USA Radio Network.
Eric Jon Phelps is my guest. His book, Vatican Assassins. He'll be speaking at the Conspiracy Conference in Santa Clara, California, May 25 and 26. And you can go to the website, conspiracycon.com, and pick up all the information if you're online. If you want to call and ask questions about tickets and so forth, 209-832-0999. Eric's book, Vatican Assassins, not available in major bookstores, can be ordered 877, toll-free, 877-280-2866, 877-280-2866, Vatican Assassins. It is a big book packed with information. Agree or disagree with Eric's conclusions, the research in the book is staggering. He does name names, as you've heard. The Knights of Malta and other so-called fraternal organizations, are most all of them tied into the papacy and the Catholic Church and the Jesuits at some point?
Oh, yes. At the leadership, at the pinnacle of power, they're all tied into the Jesuit order and subordinate to the Jesuit general. Because the Jesuit general controls the Pope. He's controlled the papacy since 1814, since the order was revived by Pius VII. And from then on, he has controlled all of it, including that Freemasonry as well.
Freemasonry, throw that in too. Does it matter who is the Pope? Does it matter that we're going to have a new Pope next time?
No, not at all. All that matters is that that Pope does what the Jesuit general tells him to do. And if he doesn't do that, then he'll be punished like Pius IX when he was driven from Rome to Gaeta, or he'll be murdered like Pope John Paul I was.
There have been more than a few popes removed, I understand.
Many of them. Pope Clement XIII, when he was about to suppress the Jesuits in 1770, he was poisoned the night before he was going to sign the suppression. And then when Clement XIV came to power, he was a Franciscan, Ganguinelli. He then entered into a 4-year investigation of the order, and after 4 years of investigating, suppressed the order at 1:30 in the morning while they were still in bed. But he said, this suppression will be my death, and sure enough, 14 months later, he was poisoned with a keta.
Let me put it this way. Why was the Pope immediately before this one removed so quickly?
Well,
if that in fact is what happened.
Well, according to Albert Manhattan, in his book, Death in the Vatican, he says that this Pope, the Pope John Paul I, was poisoned. And David Yallop's book, In God's Name, said absolutely he was murdered, and he was murdered by a couple of Freemasons. One of them was Jean Cardinal Vallet of France. So he was removed because, as I understand it, he sought to remove Pedro Arrupe from the position of being Jesuit general, and that he also sought to extend diplomatic relations to Zionist Israel prematurely.
Wow. All right. World War II and Zionists. There have been several books written about the idea that, and again there's a confusion here between Jews and Zionists, but that there was a big sacrifice in World War II, and it would seem from what you're saying that the case on the basis of your research could be made, that the Zionists were involved.
Sure. According to one book I was just recently reading at the library, the author said there, and he was a Jewish individual, said that the roundups of the Jews in Berlin was accomplished by the Jewish police working for the SS.
That's not the only story like that I've heard, by the way. There have been many others.
Well, we have Rudolf Kastner in Hungary, who sent 476,000 Jews to Auschwitz, only saved 1,600 of them, for which later this crime was brought up when he went to Israel, and the good doctor just managed to get shot by a former agent of the Mossad before he could be tried. So, yes, the high-level Zionists are Freemasons, and they're subject to the Jesuit general.
When did the Zionists hijack Israel and the Jewish dream?
They've controlled it from the beginning. David Ben-Gurion was working for the papacy. So Chaim Weizmann was absolutely the agent of the Pope. They never, ever renounced Pius XII, who, it was common knowledge, was behind the SS, He had to conquer that with Hitler. He knew all about the concentration camps in Poland, yet not one Zionist ever denounced or renounced Pius XII for his crimes. And if they would have been truly patriotic Jewish people wanting to have their own country, don't you think they would have?
There are, of course, many stories about Jews who were very active in the communist Bolshevik revolution and subsequent decades in the old Soviet Union. Were these Jews or were they Zionists?
They were racially Jews and Zionists by political belief. And the Jesuits used their Masonic Jewish Zionists as the front men for their Bolshevik revolution. Mm-hmm. Lenin was partly Jewish. Stalin, his name, Dublavishi, means son of a Jew. So they used many upfront Jews to carry out their Inquisition in Russia, but the Jesuits controlled the Bolshevik Revolution through certain Jesuits like Bishop Rock.
What does your research show in terms of who financed the Bolsheviks and the whole revolution there?
Well, we know that Jacob Schiff was a Masonic Jewish Zionist. He financed it from New York. But we also know it was financed by the Federal Reserve Bank and 120 Broad Street, which was that whole cartel of super capitalists there, financing the Bolshevik Revolution for at least $1 million or more.
Oh, at least I think it was more than that. But Jacob Schiff's name came up recently. Al Gore's daughter married Jacob Schiff's grandson, I believe.
I see. Well, Al Gore is definitely tied to the Masonic Jewish Zionists, not only through the Schiffs, then, if that's who he married, but also through Armand Hammer. Mm-hmm. Armand Hammer had free ingress and outgo all throughout the communist empire from the days of Lenin to the days of Gorbachev. Armand Hammer was the exclusive agent for Ford Motor Company to bring in Fords and tractors. Mm-hmm. He handled all the business there. But what we're not told is that when he built his Hammer House and that international trade mart there in Moscow, guess who financed it? The Bank of America, the Jesuits' Bank of America.
A.P. Giannini, former head of the Bank of America.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about a tangled web indeed. It's amazing, but when you get to the perspective that Eric Jon Phelps has, it begins to look very cohesive and coherent. Okay, let's go. Go ahead.
I add one more thing if I can, Jeff.
Yeah, sure.
The Bolshevik Revolution was made deliberately to look Jewish so that they could raise up Adolf Hitler and the fascists in Western Europe to have this huge crusade into Russia called Operation Barbarossa for the purpose of killing all the Jews in Western Russia with the Einsack group and also murdering many Orthodox people who wouldn't convert to Catholicism.
Go ahead.
The Jesuits were in the wake of the Einsack group and were in charge of that. All four groups.
Will we ever find out the even 1/10 of the true involvement of the Church of Rome in World War II? It's one of the. It seems to be one of the most closely guarded secrets of them all.
It's a very closely guarded secret, but there have been several authors that have written quite a bit on it. Edmund Parrish wrote The Secret History of the Jesuits. He also wrote The Vatican Against Europe. It was released in 1965, 64. We have the works of Admiral Manhattan with the Vatican-Moscow Alliance and the Vatican and world politics. Mm-hmm. He was a very prolific writer. There are several excellent writers who have revealed these things.
Wow. All right. Okay, let's go back a little bit and talk more about the Jesuits. Now, the most powerful man on the planet, in your estimation, is the so-called Black Pope.
Right. Peter Hans Kolvenbach.
All right. Peter
Hans Kolvenbach.
Kolvenbach. Tell us about Mr. Kolvenbach.
Mr. Kolvenbach is, of course, the Jesuit general. He commands his staff, which consists of his assistants, 7 or 8 of them. One of them is his confessor. Another one is his advisor, and then the other is
excuse me. Does he actually have a confessor in the traditional sense of the term?
Well, yes. It's just kind of his advisor, confessor to keep his conscience in order.
Huh.
Yes, he has a confessor. He has
kind of like a commissar in-house.
Mm-hmm. He has an advisor, then he has his assistants that are over various continents. And then underneath those assistants are the provincials. The provincials report to their assistant. The assistants report then to the Jesuit general. And that's how they keep tabs on all the intelligence and what's going on in all the nations of the world. This particular Jesuit general speaks 8 languages, one of them being Arabic, another being Hebrew, I believe. He was stationed in the Middle East for 17 years, and he's the perfect man to coordinate this war. So this
keeps a pretty low profile, doesn't he?
Very low profile, because that's part of the secrets. That's one of the secrets of being successful.
Mm-hmm. Where is he headquartered in New York?
You know, he's headquartered right outside of the walls of the Vatican. He's within Vatican City proper. He's right outside the walls of the Vatican. He's called the head of the Jesuit Curia, or Borgo di Santo Spirito, the village of the Holy Spirit.
I thought there was an agency in New York that...
I'm sure there's a connection.
Not a high-profile thing, but all right. Okay, very good. Peter Hans Kolvenbach, the Black Pope. Eric Jon Phelps is my guest. His book, The Vatican Assassins, 877-280-2866. Be right back. Okay, right back with Eric Jon Phelps. Eric, there is a story running around that has been in the shadows for years. I heard about it a long time ago. It has to do with the Ashkenazic invasion. Ashkenazi, so-called Ashkenazi Jews, or the Khazars. I got a nice email from a gentleman who has written up a one-page history. Bob Taft wrote it. And let me just read the first part of it and see how it fits with your research. This is from Bob Taft.
Okay.
I'll just quote it here. It is often suggested that there were no Palestinians to speak of in Palestine when the Rothschilds bankrolled the Ashkenazic invasion and occupation led by Irgun and the Stern Gang in 1948 to create a trouble spot for future political capitalization. In fact, there were close to 1 million Muslim and Christian Arab people forced from their homeland of 1,300 years in the crowded refugee camps in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip. In caves in Palestine, squatters rose near large Arab cities and the slums of the cities themselves, where they barely existed for years afterward. The fact was, these people called Jews, a word that came into use around the time of the King James Bible, aside from their adoption of a religious belief system that had once been prevalent in the area, had absolutely no business being there. They were not Semitic, but were of Turkic Mongol extraction, descendants of the people of the ancient kingdom of Khazaria, who adopted Judaism about 740 A.D., as a defensive measure, hoping it would neutralize them from Christian pressures from the north and west, as well as Muslim antagonism from the east and the south. So he's saying that these people in Khazaria, the Khazars, adopted Judaism about 740 A.D. as a defensive measure, trying to keep the Christians and the Muslims off their backs. It didn't, however, work, and they largely migrated westward into Europe, losing their national identity as Khazars, but retaining a religious one, not really their own. As the Jewish Encyclopedia stated over 50 years ago, 95% of the Jewish people don't have a drop of the blood of Israel in their veins. As recently as 100 years ago, there was still considerable antipathy on the part of Sephardic Jews, descendants of the real Judeans, against the Ashkenazic interlopers, descendants of the Khazars. Interesting history, very tightly encapsulated there. What do you think of it?
Okay, I researched that somewhat, and I used my old Encyclopedia Britannica of 1903 that's on the Pope's Holy Office of the Inquisition's list of forbidden books.
Is it really?
Absolutely. That's why they've completely revamped the whole Encyclopedia Britannica for the last 70 years. If you get the old edition, published at the turn of the century, they have 25 pages on the Jesuit order. In there, if you look up Khazaria, you will find that there were many Jews who lived in Khazaria. Khazaria was a Gentile nation composed of white Gentiles, and there were also black Gentiles there. There were also Jews there who conducted commerce, and they did not race mix. Although the king of Khazaria did adopt Judaism, not necessarily all the people did. You will not find that in this Britannica edition. And by the way, this Britannica edition of 1903 was published prior to this particular dogma being espoused by an Austrian in the, like around 1910, 1920. Prior to this, there was no such argument as the Jews being what are now the Turks and Khazars. It was unheard of. And furthermore, as far as the Ashkenazis are concerned, in the Sephardic, I'm sure there is intermixing there and race mixing, but 80 to 90% of who we see who call themselves the Jews today are in fact the Jews, and I'll tell you why. Because when the Lord Jesus Christ returns and He's about ready to set up the Davidic kingdom on earth after the 7-year tribulation, He will judge the Gentile nations that have survived on the basis of how they treated His brethren, the Jewish people. The Hebrew, God calls them Hebrew, men calls them Jews. How they have treated His brethren. The ones that have blessed them and helped them during the tribulation, they will enter into that kingdom. The ones that haven't will be killed. And that's in Matthew 25. For that to happen, Gentile nations have to know who the Jewish people are. So it's no mystery who the Jews are. The Jews know who they are, and the Gentile nations know who they are. And that's why they're always persecuted by race, not by religion per se.
I got a note from Mr. Taft's email. He says, let me find this. He says, I recall a TV interview a few years ago of the recently deceased, much-loved comedian Milton Berle telling of his early life in New York City. He mentioned that his Sephardic father had married his Ashkenazic mother, much to the horror of his own people, and was financially ruined and socially ostracized for making such a statement. Or actually for doing that, for marrying an Ashkenazic Jew, his mother. So I don't know.
I'm sure there's divisions among the Jewish people. There's no doubt. And they have Jews with lots of Gentile blood in them.
It doesn't really matter, does it? Does it really make any difference?
The important thing is, if we start deciding who's a Jew and who's not a Jew, and therefore if we decide all the people who call themselves Jews are not Jews, in New York City, they're not Jews, then we can persecute them. And if we persecute the Jewish race, we're going to see the end of our country, just like Germany.
Okay, we'll pause and come right back with Eric Jon Phelps. In fact, such controversial information, if you'd like to call in and agree or disagree, that's fine. 800-876-4123. 800-876-4123. Another very unusual program for you. And we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Lots of email, lots of telephone calls. We'll get to those now. Let's take this email first. Dear Jeff, this is from Howard. Thank you, Howard. Could your guests comment on Henry Ford's The International Jew series? First of all, let's take that part. What about Ford's infamous book?
I don't think Henry Ford had the capacity to write that 3-volume set. Henry Ford probably had a ghostwriter, just like Hoover had a ghostwriter for his Masters of Deceit and his Communist bit. But nonetheless,
he put his name on it, so.
He put his name on it, so we'll assume that he wrote it. Henry Ford he hated the Jewish people. He hated the Jewish race. He financed Adolf Hitler, and he helped to bring forts and tractors into Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution. So Henry Ford was very much biased against the Jewish people, and I say he was an agent of the Jesuits. His son joined the Catholic Church and married into the McDonald family of McDonnell Douglas notoriety. He was just another papal agent.
All right. How about Prescott Bush?
Prescott Bush the same way. Prescott Bush Sr., you mean, or the brother of George?
No.
Prescott Sr. was one of the founders of the CFR. He was also, I believe, a Knight of Malta, and he had a strong tie with the Bush family, with the Melodies, and Melodies are also the Knights of Malta. So
Prescott Bush was also censured twice by the government and ordered to stop trading with the enemy during the war.
Mm-hmm. And that was just a hoax, because if they really wanted to do that, they would have tried him for treason and executed him. It was just for public consumption.
Well, it was consumed. Okay. The protocols, the famous protocols of the Elders of Zion. Real or fiction?
Real. Protocols, they're not a forgery as far as its contents. Everything that's in the protocols are true. That's happened.
Okay.
But the men who wrote the protocols, according to Leo Lehman, who was an Irish priest, who later was converted to the Christ of the Bible, who, while he was a priest, conducted a trial in the Pope's sacred rota on behalf of American bishops and priests against the Jesuits. So Leo Lehman came out in his great book, Behind the Dictators, that he published in 1942, and said that the Jesuits wrote the protocols, and they were modeled after a previous book that the Jesuits had written called The Secrets of the Elders of Borgfontein, which was a book written against Jansenism.
Huh.
So the Jesuits wrote the protocols.
Boy, there's been a big effort out there to discredit the book as a hoax, as you well know, for years. But you're saying that the protocols are, in fact, a legitimate piece of writing.
As I read them, everything that's in there has happened.
Okay. All right.
And
is there life elsewhere in the universe?
Yes, I did.
Strange. An interesting question to drop right in there. But
yes, it is.
Let's hope there is. All right, go ahead.
And the protocols was written at the time of the Dreyfus Affair, according to Leo Lehman.
Oh, all right. So those who would say that protocols are a hoax would have a real argument with Eric Jon Phelps. Okay.
Well, I would never attribute them to the Jewish people.
I understand, but the point is that the basic mechanics and the data contained therein, in your estimation, is 100% legit.
Absolutely.
Okay. Did Henry Ford ever apologize for the International Jew series? Yes, he did. I had that story up on my website, in fact, at one point. It was kind of a hedging apology, but he did make at least a quasi-attempt to do so.
Oh, that's interesting. I never knew that.
Perhaps, let's see here. Also, what about your evaluation of Michael A. Hoffman's extensive research? Anything to say about Michael Hoffman's work?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. Michael Hoffman has been on this program in the past. You can hear that in the archives as well. Okay. Go to the telephone, and first up tonight, Carolyn in Ogden, Utah. Hello, Carolyn. Thanks for calling in. What is your question for Eric?
Yes, I have just 3 short questions.
All right, let's take them one at a time.
Okay, 1. Are the Jews a race of people or a religion?
All right.
First and foremost, a race. The Bible talks about the sons of Jacob. In Malachi, the Lord says, I am the Lord, I change not, therefore the sons of Jacob are not consumed. It's first and foremost a race. Then it's secondarily they have a religion.
Okay. And the second question is, how does the other religions fit in with the Jesuits?
All right.
The other Protestant religions, or?
Yes.
Well, the Jesuits, remember, are the soldiers of the Church of Rome, so you're talking about the non-Catholic religions, I would assume.
Yes.
All right.
Well, the Jesuits control, for example, Lutheranism through Freemasonry. They control Presbyterianism through Freemasonry. Anything that has a centralized church government is ultimately controlled by the order through Freemasonry. They control the Moonies. They're controlling now the Southern Baptist Convention with 500,000 Freemasons in that denomination. So they control all the Protestant denominations now, for the most part, through high-level Freemasonry.
Yeah. Okay.
Just like they control the Nation of Islam.
Question number 3.
And the last one is the LDS Church part of the Jesuits? Are they controlled?
Yes. The Mormon Church was started by a Freemason named Joseph Smith, and then ultimately led by Brigham Young, who was another Freemason. And Brigham Young was a personal friend of the most powerful Jesuit in America in the 19th century, whose name was Peter de Smet. who led the great wars against the Indians, the wars of the Great Plains and the Indians.
He was rather a butcher, according to some historians.
Absolutely. Well, de Smet, he controlled Philip Sheridan. Philip Sheridan was a Roman Catholic general who was the head of the U.S. Army, and he ignited the Indian Wars of the Great Plains in 1868.
All right, Carol, I hope that answers your questions.
Just one more comment. So then the Mormon Church is tied in with the Freemasonry big time.
Absolutely. If you check with the Holy Underwear, the Holy Underwear is the compass and the square.
Okay. Go back and do that again. Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, give me that. It might have gone by too quickly for some people.
Okay, Joseph Smith was a Freemason. Brigham Young was a Freemason. The temple, the Mormon temple, is patterned after Solomon's temple. In fact, that was a dry run for the rebuilding of the one in Jerusalem. The whole genealogical record keeping is done to keep track of where the Jews are. And so then Peter de Smet was a personal friend of Brigham Young. And Brigham Young hired the Paiute Indians to massacre Protestant settlers that were coming out west. And you can find that in the Godmakers.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Carolyn.
You, Jeff.
You bet. Stand by, folks. We'll take a break. Again, controversial, to say the least. And we shall continue with Eric Jon Phelps after this. Okay, right back with Eric Jon Phelps. Let's go back to the telephones and say hello to George in Salt Lake City. Hi, George. What's your question for Eric?
Yeah, good evening, Jeff Rand.
Good evening, sir.
Greetings to you.
And to you.
George. Do you recognize my voice?
You've been on before, and you had a remarkable bit of information to contribute last time. I do remember it.
Thanks, sir. Your guest, regarding your guest? Interesting. Of course, I have to disagree with some of his claims regarding the Khazar Empire and how they became Judaized. And the reason, of course, the reason was, as the gentleman has described on that page that you have read.
Yes.
But my comments really, regarding the Khazar Empire and the Khazars, yes, 95% I have been claiming to be, it's closer than that. 98% of those Jews today that claims to be the seeds of Abraham, they are truly not. They are of Khazar racial origin.
Okay.
Now, the reason I claim this is I am Hungarian by birth, and there was a Jewish man, very bright man, great writer, excellent historian by the name of Arthur Koestler. Have you heard?
Sure.
And he wrote a book which was rather controversial, of course, very explosive because of its content, the 13th tribe, where he describes the players between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea north of the Caucasian Mountains. And so, and the Hungarians were they were willing to play the game. They were subservient to the Khazars. The Hungarians, the Magyars, that is, our tribe, the Magyar tribe, that we were actually put in charge of collecting taxes for the Khazar Empire, for King Bulan and the succeeding kings. And the Khazars, were so powerful in those days, 8th, 9th century, that actually they have managed to collect taxes, levies, from about 25 Slavic tribes, around the region.
Okay.
What I'm really claiming here, sir, is that I happen to know history, that part of history, and nobody can refute that, what I know. All us Hungarians, educated Hungarians, know our history. We know who these Khazars are.
All right, let's get a comment.
Sir, yes?
Yeah, let's get a comment from Eric right now. Hold on right there, George, please. Go ahead, Eric.
What you're saying then, George, is that there existed the Jews who were the descendants of Abraham. And then all of a sudden, during their great diaspora, some epic event takes place Or now these Jews who had the Torah, they had circumcision, they had kosher meals, they had a whole culture, they had synagogues. All of a sudden now they are displaced by some epic event by Gentiles who then adopt their religion, claim to be Jews, and these Jews who are originally Jews, they just forget they're Jews and they are no longer identify themselves as a Jewish culture anymore. My question to that whole theory is what epic event automatically ended the Jewish people being truly the Jewish people, and now these Gentiles have taken their place?
The advent and the rise of the great and young dynamic Christian nation, Kiev in Ukraine, a prince led by the Prince Sviatoslav, he was the reason why the Cossacks had to make a decision. The Prince Sviatoslav warned them to adopt a more civilized way of life. Their manners, regarding sex, their sexual habits and so forth were so atrocious that the Russians, could not put up with it, having such neighbors, on their southern borders. And so King Bula knew that the Russian Prince Sviatoslav, had the power also, not just the mouth. And so he summoned leaders or representatives of the three major religions, sir, and they happened to like and fancy, the Babylonian Talmud. Because the Babylonian Talmud, by its content, has fitted very well, the temperament, the culture, and the characteristics of this race.
Okay, stand by, George. And Eric, we're getting a little esoteric here, but I'll let you answer that. Then we have to get one final comment from George.
I would have to say that even though King Bullen did adopt Judaism, which is validated in my research, there is no epic event that displaced the historic Jewish people from being who they were and being substituted for this Gentile race of Khazars. There is no historical event for that.
Okay, we'll have to agree to disagree on this, George. One final comment from you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Jeffrey, I cannot tell you how much I admire the depth of your intellect, sir.
All right, thank you.
It's amazing how you cover the entire spectrum, sir, from the frivolous, to the great depths of incredible.
Really,
it's absolutely fantastic. But my final comment.
Sure.
Henry Ford. We never claimed that Henry Ford alone has written, the 3 volumes, International Jew. Henry Ford, some of his brightest, finest, brightest people. And he sent them out throughout the world. He told them, do not come back till you have a full picture of and the scope of the involvement of the Jewish Zionist conspiracy on a global scale. They went out, including they went into Soviet Union. They returned, and they published a book, the International Jew.
Mm-hmm.
The book, was periodically, weekly, was actually being printed, in a Dearborn Independent. Do you remember that, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I have seen mention of that it was serialized.
But it was not Henry Ford, not at all. It was his brilliant young people that worked in his empire, in his corporation, or in his company.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, the reason he was caused, really, to go and investigate, the activities of the international Jewish financiers is because actually he was convinced that they were trying to take over his business.
Well, his motive.
That was the very reason. I really thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Thanks, George. Thanks for being out there, and thanks for participating. And again, thanks for the very nice compliment. I appreciate it. Henry Ford's book, or whoever wrote the book for Ford, did talk about profiling, an MO, a character, a way of doing business, a way of approaching people in business, which a lot of people say is not an inaccurate portrayal. And so what? How do you see that?
Well, I see, as far as the way the Jews do business?
Yeah. As far as Ford's perception of them, paranoid as it may have been, the profile that he presented in the book has been talked about by a lot of people for decades as being reasonably accurate of a certain portion, at least, of the Zionist movement.
Well, I'm sure there's lots of truth with regard to the Zionist movement that is in the International Jew. My objection to the work is there's not one mention of the Jesuit order and their influence, in fact, their origination of the whole Zionist movement and its relationship to the papacy. It's always an attack against the Zionist Jews, and there are plenty of them in the Council on Foreign Relations,
Sure.
but there's never the connection made to the Knights of Malta, like William F. Buckley, like Alexander Haig, like George Tenet, and others. And also there's never connection made to the Jesuit order, like CFR presider Joseph O'Hare, president of Fordham University.
So you would suggest that Henry Ford and his men missed the forest because of the trees?
I would say that they were very much motivated and part of the Jesuit conspiracy, working for the Jesuit order, yes.
Okay. All right. Fascinating to look at all of this through the eyes and mind of our callers and my guest tonight, Eric Jon Phelps. His book, The Vatican Assassins, which details all of his work, is out there and available. All you have to do is call for it. Give us the number one more time.
It's 1-877-280-2866. It's 1-877-280-2866, Wisdom Books and Press, California hours from 9 to 5.
Okay. If you're on the East Coast, make it early. That's Pacific Coast time. Malachi Martin, very famous on late night talk radio. A lot of interesting things to say. What's your opinion of his work?
Malachi Martin, in my estimation, was a liar. Malachi Martin, in his works, attempted to portray three great powers vying for world hegemony. That is the papacy, the United States, and Russia. That's all a lie. The papacy has been controlled by the Jesuit general since 1814. The United States has been controlled by the Jesuit general no later than 1868 with the 14th Amendment. And Russia has been controlled by the Jesuit general no later than 1922 when Joseph Stalin was named Secretary of the Communist Party. The Jesuits control all three factions. And Malachi Martin was in a position of intelligence to know that.
So he was doing disinformation or what?
Yes, he was. Absolutely.
Some of his material had to be accurate, or people wouldn't pay any attention to it. That's the way, if in fact he was doing disinformation, and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with you, but disinformation is always predicated on a lot of good information.
Became the illusion of a Cold War.
Yeah. Okay, all right, lots to think about here. We'll pause. You callers online, hang on. And let's do that right now if we can. It is Santa Clara, California. In Santa Rosa is Brian standing by. Hello, Brian. Welcome to the program.
Hello, guys.
Hi.
I plan on being there at Santa Clara, by the way.
Great. Good.
Nice to meet you.
Yep. Well, guys, the reason why I called is because of drugs. And I'm not really thinking about the hardcore, like crack, heroin, the ones that kill you. I'm more concerned about the natural ones like mushrooms, like animated muscara, and cannabis, hemp, or otherwise known as marijuana.
Okay, what's the direct question with that?
Okay. Well, the question is, because we know that the latter of the two, the natural ones, the herbal ones, people don't OD off those. Those don't kill you. Well, the point is, we know how these Jesuits have so much control, and it seems like if they would want us to have it, we would have it. And I want to know why they keep it away from us. What do they know?
Well, what's the Jesuit connection to the international drug trade and the trade here in the United States in terms of keeping the so-called lower-level drugs out of the hands of legality?
Excellent question. The Jesuit general controls the international drug trade through his international intelligence community. The Central Intelligence Agency works together with the mafia in distributing the drugs. With regard to hemp, it is a policy that whenever this country enters into a treaty with another country, that country, if it grows hemp, will not grow hemp any longer. Because hemp, in the words of Jefferson, he said, America will be great because America is rich in hemp. Hemp is for rope, clothing, wood. We could build all of our homes out of hemp. We wouldn't need to chop down our forests. Hemp is a crop that can be grown without any pesticides or herbicides.
It's a super plant, isn't it?
It's a super plant, and we have every right to it. And the other thing is, we have not been allowed to have painkillers. Every time we're in terrible pain, we have to go to what I call in my book in chapter 49, the Holy Office of the Inquisition, which is the Food and Drug Administration and the American Medical Association, and they are the only ones who have access to the opiates or the painkillers, when we should have access to them as well. So they keep the painkillers away from us to make sure we go to the Holy Office of the Inquisition. They run the international drug trade and make that available on the street. It's a continual weakening and sickening of the American people.
Boy, it's amazing how entire populations are held hostage over their pain. Talk about hunger getting people to respond. Pain will probably get them to respond even quicker.
Sure.
Yep, and they go right down to the doc, and they pay the money, and they get the prescription. They head to the pharmacy, and they pick it up. And it would seem that by birthright we have a legal right to the reduction of personal pain and suffering.
Absolutely. We have a right to the herbal opiates that can reduce our pain.
Okay, excellent question. As far as the mushrooms are concerned, a lot of people go out and partake. They are on God's green earth, as it is said, and totally natural, as are other things. We've done many programs on them in the past. All right, good question. Thank you for that, Brian. And Conspiracy Conference, May 25 and 26. Brian will be there and probably come up and say hello to you, Eric, which will be very good.
My pleasure to talk with you.
Okay, in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Steve is up next with a question. Hello, Steve.
Yeah, hi, Jeff.
Hi.
And Eric.
Hi,
boy, thank you for having him on for all 3 hours, Jeff. Wish you'd have him on for a few more times. But
he's an amazing reservoir of knowledge and information.
Yeah, that is definitely true. I got his book, and it's like a phone book. But anyway, I had 3 questions. I thought up a couple others while I was on hold. But the first one is, Eric, you'd mentioned the previous time that you were on Jeff's program that I believe the Islamic religious leaders they're called muftis. Is that right?
M-U-F-T-I, muftis, yeah.
Muftis.
Okay. You had mentioned that they were Masons, and that's a blockbuster statement. How are you able to determine that?
Well, I have a source that can prove it, but I try to keep it quiet. But if you look at the symbolism of Freemasonry, especially in the Mystic Shrine, what do you see? All those Shriners wear fezzes.
Sure do.
Caps called fez.
Right.
That's an Islamic dress. By the way, the Pope's Zouave army, in the days of John Stewart and even now, they also wear fezzes. If you look at the symbol, again, of the Shriner Freemasons, they use a crescent.
Yeah.
That's Islamic.
And the swords?
And the scimitar, that's right.
Scimitars, yeah.
That's also Islamic.
You mentioned something interesting, the Zouaves. I've seen old television videotapes, and they used to have the Zouaves would actually participate in parades here.
Right.
And get all dressed up in their Arabic garb and march. Boy, it was quite a colorful thing, I guess. Right. But they've sort of faded into the background. But the Zouaves, Z-O-U-V-E-S, I think.
Z-O-A-U-V-E-S.
Z-O-A, that's right. Interesting, the Pope's private army, as it were.
That's right. In fact, when John Stewart escaped from the United States with the help of the papacy, he enlisted in the Pope's Zouave army and was stationed in Alexandria, Egypt, when he was arrested by the U.S. and brought back to the United States for trial in 1867. I have a picture of Surat in my book in his Zouave uniform.
Amazing. All right. Go ahead, Steve. Another question.
Well, actually, do the muftis have to be do they have to be 32nd or 33rd degrees to be a mufti?
Even more than that, are they all Masonic or just the key mufti ayatollahs?
Yeah.
The key mufti ayatollahs are Masonic. The major players in the Middle East right now are the Saud dynasty, the Hussein dynasty, and the Hussein dynasty also includes Yasser Arafat because his uncle was Amin al-Husseini, I believe that's the full name, who was the Mufti of Jerusalem, a Freemason appointed to his post by another brother Freemason who was a Masonic Jewish Zionist, the first High Commissioner of Palestine, Herbert Samuel.
By the way, Yasser Arafat's name is not Yasser Arafat. He has another. His original name is much different than that. I had it the other day. I don't have it at my fingertips, but that's an assumed name.
And just like the Bush family is Masonic, so you have all these players now tied together through high-level Freemasonry, ultimately controlled by the Jesuit order because the Jesuits wrote the first 25 degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. They merged it all together with the Council of Wilhelmsbad in 1782 and have controlled it in this country since 1801.
Vladimir Putin?
I don't know much about him, but I'm sure he's Jesuit controlled because every premier of Russia has been since Lenin.
Premier Jiang Zemin?
Same way. The Jesuits caused the Chinese, after the Jesuits overthrew the Manchu dynasty in 1912, they were in control of Chiang Kai-shek and orchestrated his defeat so that Mao Zedong could come to power in 1949. So they absolutely trained Mao and work for him.
Wow. Butchery and slaughtery doesn't stop them for
50 million Chinese.
Yeah, at least. Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, okay. The third temple that's going to be built, will that actually be built by the Zionists then? The third temple over in Jerusalem?
I think it will be built by the Zionists there with the help of their high rabbis, but it will be under UN protection.
Okay, and then are you familiar with the Temple Mount Foundation?
I'm not.
Okay. All right. And then the third question, are you familiar with the Committee of 300?
Yes.
How are they tied in with the Jesuits?
That's all Masonic or Knights of Malta, and they're the Jesuits' bankers.
Okay, so let's see, run that by again. They're all
Masonic, high-level Freemasons, or Knights of Malta, like Prince Bonhard of Holland, who is a Knight of Malta and a Nazi and the founder of the Bilderbergers. And they are nothing more than the Vatican bankers, along with the House of Rothschild and the Sassoon House of England.
Wow.
But it's a real group. There are about 300 of them, give or take, and
they just carry out the business for the Vatican.
That's the financial enforcement arm, as it were.
One of the keys to understanding that is Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon was the hammer of the Jesuit order to punish the Roman Catholic monarchs of Europe for expelling them from their countries, Spain, France, Italy, Austria, and so on. Napoleon was a Roman Catholic Freemason. His second consul on the consulate was Abbé Emmanuel Saez, who was Jesuit trained and a temple coadjutor. And Napoleon was financed by, guess who? The House of Rothschild. So the House of Rothschild financed everything the Jesuits wanted to do through their Corsican Robespierre on a horseback, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Robespierre on horseback.
That's right. That's what Madame Say told him.
Interesting. 800-876-4123, and we'll take one more question from Steve if he has it after the break. I am Jeff Rentz, and glad you're here with Eric Jon Phelps. Okay, we're back, and let's get a final comment from Steve in Colorado Springs for Eric Jon Phelps.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that it's important to distinguish between Christianity and Catholicism. The Crusades are a perfect example. Jesus never told us to go and kill people who don't accept him as their Savior. We're just simply to present the information and let them make up their mind. But I'm not anti-Catholic people, but I'm definitely anti-Catholic doctrine because the Catholic Church's doctrine is a false doctrine, and if people will study that, they will find that they do not need the Roman Catholic Church or any Catholic Church or any church, actually, for their salvation. It's strictly through Jesus' shed blood on the cross. That's just the final comment I want to make.
Okay, thanks very much, Steve.
Yeah, thanks.
Indeed. Eric, anything to add to that?
I think he's absolutely right. About anti-Catholic people and anti-Catholic doctrine, or actually Jesuit doctrine, because they control the doctrines, and the Jesuit deeds that they have done. And furthermore, the essence of Roman Catholicism is nothing more than Greco-Roman paganism that's been Christianized with Christian names. And that's amply proven by Alexander Hislop's work, The Two Babylons, Charles Chinnickly's work, 50 Years in the Church of Rome. It can be easily proven, so it's not fair to say that that's Christianity, that's Romanism. It was called Romanism all throughout the 17th, 18th, 19th century. And in this century, the Jesuits have sought to merge Protestantism and Catholicism and call it all Christianity. And that's not fair or correct.
No, it doesn't sound correct at all.
Because in Protestant nations, in white Protestant nations where the Reformation prospered, they never persecuted the Jewish race. In Catholic nations, they always did.
Okay.
That's an important point to distinguish.
Right,
Anyone in the
very much
United
so.
States, has never had a formal Jewish persecution in 200 years.
And Germany was largely Catholic.
It was Protestant, but Bavaria was the Catholic. Remember, the two major Jesuit Catholic strongholds in Europe are Ireland and Bavaria.
Okay.
And out of Bavaria, they brought their Third Reich. That's where the Tool Society began, that the Jesuits controlled. And so that's when they took control of the German government. All the high Nazis were Roman Catholic. Bormann, after he escaped to South America, became a lay brother in the Redemptorist Order. His son became a Jesuit, and were all tied in together with the order. So when the Roman Catholic Bavarians took over Germany, they then persecuted the Jews with the German people.
Did Hitler die in the bunker, or was that his double?
That was his double. Hitler escaped along with Mengele, Bormann, Eichmann, which brings up another question. Why did the Jesuits allow the Mossad to capture Eichmann and bring him back to Jerusalem in 1960?
That is an interesting question.
Very good question. But all the high Nazis escaped to South America except Heinrich Himmler. You know why he died?
He took his whole family out with him.
Well, Hitler was brought to power by the Jesuit order through his father and his uncle. But Himmler did not know Russia was controlled by the Jesuits. He thought Russia was controlled by the Jews, the Jewish Bolshevik and international Jewish conspiracy, quote unquote. So Himmler, towards the end of the Reich, he goes to a prince, I believe, of Sweden, and tries to negotiate an attack against Russia. For that, Hitler stripped him of all of his powers, ordered him to be shot. So Himmler, unfortunately, jumps out of the frying pan into the fire and escapes to England into the hands of the British Secret Service, and of course that was the end of him, because the British Secret Service worked with SS, OSS, and so on. But Himmler made the same fatal mistake that Patton made. They both wanted to attack Russia, and Russia was to win in World War II, because that would be the center of the Cold War and the birth of international terrorism.
Rudolf Hess.
Rudolf Hess was deliberately sent to England and imprisoned for the reason that his replacement was Martin Bormann. Martin Bormann became the secretary. He took his orders directly from the Jesuits who ran the SD, and Bormann then escaped to South America with the rest.
There were a number of U-boats that went, of course, to Argentina and other points in South America. And I remember the one story of, I can't remember which U-boat it was, but it showed up, pulled into port, empty except for a very small crew, and quite clearly it had a great deal of cargo in it, but nobody there.
Yes, they had lots of cargo, and one of their major cargoes was priceless art treasures. They brought many of Europe's art treasures into South America.
I had a very interesting email the other day, which I'll try and get to in a minute here. Okay, let's see.
And the man who received those guys in Argentina was Knight of Malta, Juan Perón.
Okay. Lawrence Caples has an email question for you. Was Malachi Martin head of Vatican intelligence?
Malachi Martin was, I don't know if he was the head, but he was very much involved with it because he was involved with the Pope's Curia. He was one of the Pope's advisors. And if he was one of the Pope's advisors, you can bet he was close to the Jesuit general.
Right.
So he was definitely involved in intelligence. But he was a disinformation figure when he came out and went public.
Was the Jesuit general at the recent Council of Bishops?
I would imagine.
All right. Let's see what other questions we have here. Break time. We'll catch this question. Is it break time already? Yeah, it seems early. All right. Here's a question. Please ask your guest who he thinks is behind all these sex abuse exposures. We've touched upon that before, but people missed the early part of the show regarding the Catholic Church, since it's all gone on since way back when. Why now, and by whom, and for what purpose? So we'll revisit that question for you latecomers as we continue with Eric Jon Phelps in just a couple of minutes. And welcome back. Jeff Rentz with Eric Jon Phelps. And lots of questions coming in here. This is from David Burrows. Your guest, Mr. Phelps, seems to be fairly familiar with the Bible. However, as concerns the question of the legitimacy of the current controllers of Israel, there are perhaps a couple of references in the Bible. Revelations 2:9 and Revelations 3:9. Both are references to Jesus' knowledge of the false Jews that are, however, of the synagogue of Satan. This is not made up. Pull out your Bible and look it up. Hope this adds some food for thought. And that's from David Burrows. All right, again, the quote, both are references to Jesus' knowledge of the false Jews that are, however, of the synagogue of Satan. That's a quote. Eric?
Yes. The Lord wasn't making mention that they were false Jews racially. They were false Jews spiritually.
Spiritually, all right, I get it.
That's what he's talking about. Okay?
Mm.
For example, the Babylonian Talmud says that Jesus Christ was a bastard and Mary was a whore. I don't think that's very nice. So I would have to consider the men who wrote that as Antichrist. But I do not condemn the Jewish people or the Torah simply because of the Talmud or the Zohar or the Kabbalah. Those three things have nothing to do with the Torah, the Jewish people, or Moses and the law that he gave.
Is the Black Pope a candidate for the Antichrist in some people's estimations?
No. The purpose for the Black Pope, and I believe the devil raised up the Jesuit order, was to protect the sacred office of the papacy, because it is an unbroken chain of the Pope, or the papal Roman Caesar, is what I call him in my book, who will ultimately be killed. He will be resurrected, come back to life. He will destroy the Vatican, and then he will go down into the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem and demand to be worshipped as God for 3.5 years or 42 months. And this is the time that the Bible describes in Jeremiah 30, verse 7, as a time of Jacob's trouble, but he will be saved out of it.
World War III. Coming to a planet near us?
Well, I think what we have going now is going to be a major shift in political powers, especially in the West, so we could very well probably call this a World War III. But after this happens and the United States is reduced and occupied and the Islamic nations are reduced, Israel will be in a place to rebuild their temple. And that's exactly what the papacy is using as Masonic Jewish Zionists for.
The Israeli spy ring in the United States has been said to be the largest discovered organized espionage campaign in our history.
Well, I don't think the Mossad is an enemy of the CIA. The CIA, in fact, Reinhard Gehlen, according to John Loftus in his great work, The Secret War Against the Jews, shows that in the early 50s, Reinhard Gehlen was training the Mossad. Reinhard Gehlen was Hitler's most sinister general, who was made a general in the American Army by an act of Congress. So Gehlen helps to create the CIA, and he also creates the Mossad. So the Mossad is an extension of the Black Pope's intelligence agency. And another issue here, too. If the Mossad was really, truly pro-Israeli people, why haven't they killed Yasser Arafat?
It's a question we've asked on this program rhetorically a number of times.
Because Yasser Arafat is the greatest traitor to Islam who probably ever lived. His purpose is, indeed, he kills many Jewish people, which is a crime and a sin, but his purpose is to smoke out Arab people, Arab leaders that will truly be against the Pope's Zionist government. These men commit their crimes against the Jewish people by mass murder, and then this gives the right to the Mossad to go out and kill them.
He's a bird dog.
He's a bird dog. That's all Yasser Arafat is. That's why he'll never be removed. And I have a picture on my webpage of Yasser Arafat, the Council on Foreign Relations, right along with Shimon Peres.
What a scene.
Yes.
How long have you been at this, Eric? Your scholarship, your study, your research?
About 20 years.
Have you ever had to say, hey, I was wrong on that? And
oh, yeah. Oh, sure.
What was the biggest thing? What was the biggest thing you were tripped up on? Anything in particular stand out?
I couldn't make the connection between Freemasonry and the Vatican for quite a while. That was a problem. And I also couldn't you could not distinguish between the Zionists and the Jewish people.
Well, most people can't.
Yeah, see, that was a problem for a while until I realized that the Zionists were Masonic, the Jesuits controlled Freemasonry, and thus the Jesuits must control the Zionists, and thus the Mossad. Now I had the connection.
Lights on.
Yes.
Bingo.
In fact, when I was reading, what's his name, Plausible Denial by, what's his name? The attorney.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm
Mark
trying
Lane.
to blank too.
Mark Lane.
Lane.
When I ran across that portion in his book where he talked about Rudolf Kastner, when he was being accused by a poverty-stricken Jew there in Israel with his pamphlet 51, accusing Kastner of being a traitor, that he worked with Eichmann in deporting Jews to Auschwitz, when I read that, then I knew that Zionism was run by the Jesuits because it was working in conjunction with the SS.
800-876-4123. We've got one segment remaining with the prodigiously remarkable Eric Jon Phelps, who will be at the Conspiracy Conference in Santa Clara, May 25 and May 26th, and you can go to their website, take a look at all the information about the conference. A big name roster of people will be presenting there. ConspiracyCon.com is the website. And right back. Eric Jon Phelps. We had the Cold War for a long time, the threat of nuclear war, and there were several occasions, apparently, during which the actually exchange of nuclear weapons was almost accomplished, as it were. We came close to some pretty bad times, but by and large the Cold War was a fraud and a hoax perpetrated on the peoples of the world. I'd like to hear Eric speak about that.
Yes. The Cold War was planned much earlier, probably at the turn of the century, it was planned by the Jesuit order. They planned to run the Second 30 Years' War from 1914 to 1945. Then with their nuclear war hoax, their airborne nuclear war hoax that they established at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because no bombs were dropped there that were nuclear. They were flash devices, and the nuclear devices were on the ground. And when they created this nuclear war hoax...
Whoa. A lot of people say, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. The Enola Gay did not drop the Fat Man or the Big Boy? The two bombs?
Yes, Boxcar dropped Big Boy, and Enola Gay dropped Fat Man, but they were not nuclear bombs. They were flash devices that signaled the Jesuits on the ground, because Pedro Rupi was the rector of the novitiate at Yamaguchi, which was in between Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And there is where they assembled their nuclear devices on the ground, because they had first detonated one of them in Tunguska in Siberia in 1908. So they went after...
By the way, if that's true, I believe it was an aerial object, but if that's true, that was one hell of a big blast for a first trial run, wasn't it?
No,
that was a big bomb.
Which first trial
explosion? Tunguska.
Tunguska, yes. Mm-hmm.
No, that wasn't just a little pop in the sandy desert of New Mexico.
No, that was every indication there that could possibly even be a hydrogen bomb device.
Well, it's certainly big enough. Although I personally don't go along with that, but keep going.
Okay. So they created the Cold War on the basis of what I consider to be the airborne nuclear war hoax. I'm not saying that nukes don't detonate. I'm saying that they cannot be launched and detonate in motion in the air with airbursts.
I've read that too. I've read that, and it's a provocative, although a very eclectic argument, but it's out there.
Well, I have a Jesuit connection that pretty much validates that. The route they pulled it off.
Huh.
Okay, so now they have the basis for their Cold War, mutual assured destruction. But the irony is that the Jesuits control Dirty Harry Truman, who's a Shriner Freemason, and they control Joseph Stalin. So they give this device to both sides to create fear and terror among the people, so that the United States government and military will not intervene with all this mass murder going on in Europe in East Germany, and so on. So Stalin gets to kill the vast majority of Protestants in Eastern Europe. That is all of what was going on in East Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, primarily the Protestant Inquisition at the hands of Stalin. So when they finished up with their Cold War in 1989, they had killed the majority of the world's enemies against the papacy. Now all the dictators are either openly or covertly subordinate to the Jesuit general. And now that they ended the Cold War, now they've started the war against the Western Hemisphere using Islam. Because Islam is the sword of the church. If you evaluate Islam in the last 100 years, that every killing that they've ever been involved in has always benefited the Jesuit order. Look at the million or so Armenians that the Turkish Islamics murdered in, 1898?
No, it was 1912, 1909, something.
Okay, it was early in the 20th century that the Turks murdered 1 million Armenian Christians who were not subject to the Bishop of Rome. Islam was busy involved with the SS, with the invasion of Barbarossa. In fact, the Mufti of Jerusalem was over the head of that legion that was with the SS.
Well, it's interesting. To fast forward to Kosovo and Bosnia,
sure, same thing.
The conflict going on there does seem to mirror it all.
The Jesuit general is using the American military to destroy the Orthodox Serbs, painting them with the brush of craziness.
Oh boy, that was amazing. I'm not a big fan of Milosevic, but he is presenting an interesting. Yeah, he's presenting a pretty stout defense in court and making some. He's not getting the press, of course, but he's trying to tell it like it happened to him.
And then you have the Albanian Muslims with their drug trade working in conjunction with the CIA, and they're also murdering Serbs in this very moment.
Well, look what's happening in Afghanistan. From the all-time low opium crop of a year ago to a world record opium crop in 1 year they're expecting. Not a big surprise. Here's an interesting email I got. We talked about Adolf Hitler not dying in the bunker, that he had at least one, pardon the pun, dead ringer double. Except for the mole. The guy didn't have a mole. Now, I got an email the other day. This is interesting. I won't identify who sent it. It said, your article, I had a link up to a very lengthy article on Adolf Hitler, written by a Greek journalist. Very good. Your article on Adolf Hitler not dying is correct. His granddaughter used to visit our home in California in 1989 and 90. They lived in Argentina. She lived in La Jolla. He did not die until around 1992-93. The photos of the alleged Adolf are simply rewriting history as alleged. And I asked for more information, and I got this back. Her name was, I'll leave that blank. She and her male friends had what was called XX Industries. One gentleman's name was Robert, one was Mark, and the other was Kevin. Delightful young people. Sonia, a beautiful young lady. She had long blonde hair. That was her name, Sonia. We put that out. Blue eyes and sharp as a tack. Her height, 5'7", slim. One time I overheard her talking to my late husband about her grandfather, Adolf, and she said there was one identifying mark that would separate him from the doppelgangers, and it was a mole on his face. The doppelgangers did not have this mole. Back in 1992, 93, somewhere in that time frame, one of the grocery store rag newspapers had a photo of the alleged body of Hitler, who had recently passed away in Argentina. Sure enough, there was the mole. So, that sound viable to you?
Absolutely. All the top Nazis that were obedient to the end got out, and they were escorted out with the help of Bishop Hudal. They arranged for their Red Cross task force, and they went to South America, and many of them went into North America. The Mueller, who was the head of the Gestapo, he came to the United States with the help of Cardinal Spellman, and was an advisor for the CIA until he died in, 73, 74.
Well, there were more Nazis came to America than the average person who knows a little bit about it will ever understand. That's been
the Vatican secreted out of Europe 50,000 Nazis. to the Vatican wetlands.
Well, they really were the agents of the Vatican, so
absolutely
taking care of their own, and why it shouldn't be a big surprise.
Right, they were just fulfilling the Jesuits' Council of Trent.
Here's a note for you from Joseph Gates. Thank you, Joseph. Dear Jeff, thanks for the excellent program. Many times I'm reading this through first time. I applaud you for the courageous stand you take on some issues. However, lately I find you somewhat critical of the Catholic Church and the things happening at its core. Definitely wrong, of course. The thing is, we have to understand where these things originate, and that takes lots of study. And he gives me an idea of books to get. One booklet called The Human Genus. You familiar with that one?
No, I'm not.
Anyway, he goes on. The man who wrote it was Pope Leo the 13th.
Jesuit-trained Pope.
The powers he is talking about have finally won the battle he was valiantly fighting. When you know that and who these powers are, you will realize that the Catholic Church itself is being held hostage. Then you will understand what is happening. Remember, the country which has the most marvelous constitution is the U.S. How come? It has the most evil government. Simply because the people who are holding America hostage are the same ones destroying the Church of Rome. When you learn all of this, you won't be so harsh when you refer to Catholicism. And I have not put down Catholicism as it's practiced by the masses at all. That's not been the issue. But thank you, Joseph, for that. You have a comment, Eric?
Yes, the Jesuit order took over the papacy after it punished it, after it imprisoned Pope Pius VII for 5 years using Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1814, the Jesuit order was revived, and since that time, the Jesuit general has controlled the papacy, and the Jesuits are the Pope's penholders. Everything that's happened has been under their guidance. And our country here, Washington's Calvinistic Republic, was destroyed in 1868 with a forced ratification of the 14th Amendment, creating what my book calls the Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire, the monster of the 20th century, to restore the Pope's temporal power around the world with all of our rulers. So the Jesuits have taken our country, and they've taken the papacy, they've taken Russia, and they've taken China. They have it all. So we need to do exactly what the other nations of the 19th century did. They kicked them all out of Europe. Virtually every country in Europe, I believe, except Belgium, kicked the Jesuits out, and they came here into England. And the Pope, in 1773, the great Pope Clement XIV, with his papal bull, Dominic Ac Redemptor Noster, suppressed and abolished the Jesuits forever, confiscated all their wealth and treasure, and abolished the order and forbade them to ever teach or preach again. So it's not like the papacy has not sought to resist the Jesuit order.
Third secret of Fatima?
Fatima? The purpose of Fatima was to incite the Catholic masses of Europe against communist Russia, which the Jesuits secretly ran, for the purpose of converting communist Russia to Catholicism, which was the purpose of Operation Barbarossa.
Third secret? Is there one?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. Eric, thank you. A prodigious presentation.
My pleasure, and you had a wonderful audience, and it was my pleasure to speak with you, Jeff.
Thank you. We'll talk again. I'd like to, if you would, get a chance from time to time, just keep me updated on your views of what's happening, and we'll see if your research pans out. 25 and 26th of May this month, sent to Clara, California, conspiracycon.com for all the details.
And you can get the book.
Yeah, it's 877-280-2866. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you, and we'll all talk soon. Take care. Well, it's a big screw, as it were. It gets going from then on. Tell us how that brings us all the grief we're dealing with today.
Okay. The Dreyfus Affair took place in the late 1800s, in the 1890s actually, when a Jewish French captain in the French army was accused of treason. He was tried, he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to Devil's Island for 10 years. After 10 years, his case was reconsidered, and he was found not guilty, which left France in a lot of shame over that. One of the things that Raymond Poincaré, who was an attorney, pointed out, and you can find this in Pierre Van Passen's great work, Days of Our Years, was that the Jesuits were behind the Dreyfus Affair. This ultimately led to their expulsion in 1901 from France, as they had already been expelled by Gambetta in 1880. But at the trial of the Dreyfus Affair, Theodor Herzl was a reporter, a correspondent from Austria, and it was there that he used the Dreyfus Affair as the impetus to start the movement called Zionism, to bring the Jews back to Palestine. So the Dreyfus Affair is the backbone for the creation of Zionism and the return of the Jews there, and also the Balfour Declaration and so on.
The Balfour, B-A-L-F-O-U-R Declaration was the, well, I guess the last century. That was the real genesis of our current issue in the Middle East, the Balfour Declaration.
That's right.
That was the political green light for all of it to transpire.
That's correct. Now, we have to realize that the papacy hates the Jewish race. The great challenge for the Pope in his quest to be the universal monarch of the world are the Jewish people. They have to be annihilated. So the purpose of Zionism is to destroy the Jewish race, to get all the Jews back to Palestine for the purpose of killing them all there. That's the real reason for it. So to do this, the English, being controlled by the Jesuits, and particularly Balfour, they created the Balfour Declaration, and then the Jews were able to start to go back to Palestine. And then ultimately they fomented World War II, which resulted in the Jewish Holocaust.
They fomented. Who do you mean they?
I mean the Jesuit order fomented World War II, yes. Because Hitler had to conquer that with the Pope, Mussolini had to conquer that, Franco had to conquer that, and Stalin had a secret concordat.
All right, what is a concordat?
A concordat is a treaty between the papacy and a nation, whereby the Pope extends certain privileges and immunities to that nation in exchange for certain duties and obligations of that nation.
Okay.
And in Mussolini's Italy, one of the duties and obligations was the outlawing of Protestantism. You could not read a Protestant Bible. And one of the duties and obligations under Hitler's regime, and remember, the Knight of Malta, Franz von Papen, negotiated the Concordat on behalf of Hitler with the Pope. And one of the duties and obligations out of that was ultimately the creation of the SS by Heinrich Himmler, whose father was a Jesuit coadjutor. His father was a professor who tutored Prince Heinrich Wittelsbach of Bavaria, who was the most powerful monarch in all of Catholic Bavaria. And Himmler's father's brother was a Jesuit canon who later became a high officer in Himmler's SS, in fact in the SD.
Eric Jon Phelps, who has crafted a book, it's more than a book, it's an indictment and an expose and all sorts of things, called Vatican Assassins. Many of you have heard of the book. Maybe you heard Eric's first visit on this program. It is a stunning book which rips open all sorts of secrets, as it were, exposing a power structure on the planet that many people will live this life and maybe their next life and never hear a word about. It is quite an amazing story, and welcome back, Eric. How are you?
I'm fine, Jeff, and yourself?
It's busy. It's an amazing time we live in, as you well know. The book Vatican Assassins, when was it actually released and how is it doing? This is really a truly controversial work you've put together.
It was released last July of 2001, and it's been out for nearly a year, and we printed 5,000 copies. And I think about half of them have been sold. It's some places it's very hard to get it into, like England. If it's not addressed with a kind of juvenile signature, it will be returned. And so it will not be sold outright in the open at Barnes and Nobles or Borders, but some of those outlets will order it, and some of them won't.
They won't stock it, though?
No.
Well, why am I not surprised? It's a book that obviously has been talked about a great deal. You have thrown a big rock in a rather small pond, as they say.
I just got an email from a black Muslim today who took the book into Harlem, and he confronted Minister Farrakhan. What was his relationship with the Jesuits? And he asked him that question, 12 times during a 2-hour interview, and Mr. Farrakhan did not give him an answer.
Now what?
So this guy is real interested on the Masonic connection of Mr. Farrakhan with the Jesuit order.
Wow. All right, before we get into the book itself and some of the amazing history which bears directly on what's going on today in many cases, I want to get your overview on the current conflict, the never-ending conflict in the Middle East, and the Vatican's interests in the Holy Land and how those interests are certainly being expressed in some of the violence, at least, we're seeing in the news all the time. Tell us your viewpoint on all that.
Well, going into the past, particularly in the Crusades, the purpose for those Crusades, launched by the Pope, was to take Jerusalem for himself out of the hands of the Muslims, that he had originally created the religion of Islam, according to Dr. Roberto Rivera. But the Crusades failed, and Jerusalem was in the hands of Islam until Allenby took Jerusalem from the Turks in 1917. England had been in the hands of the Jesuits since 1800 with King George III, all throughout the reign of Victoria. And then ultimately, when Allenby took Jerusalem, the Jesuits took Jerusalem. Prior to that, just maybe 20, 30 years prior to that, they had ignited the Dreyfus Affair. And out of the Dreyfus Affair was born the Zionist movement to return to their homeland.
Okay, talk to us a little bit about the Dreyfus Affair. And I'm at least passingly familiar with it, but many people are not. It's a very famous name, Dreyfus, the Dreyfus Affair. And upon the Dreyfus Affair turns the big...
Edmund Paris, Himmler's uncle, was the real master of the SS, and he was the favorite of the Jesuit general, Count Ratajkowski.
Now, so we don't leave anybody behind, Eric. Just for formality's sake, tell us what Jesuits are and how they figure in with the Roman Catholic Church. Some people who are not Catholics don't know.
Okay. The Dark Ages had ruled for 1,000 years. The Pope had been the king of the nations throughout Europe. He was supreme over all the monarchs. Then came the Reformation. The Reformation resulted in whole nations breaking away from what is called the temporal power of the Pope. The Pope claims to have two powers, represented by two swords, if you see it on the papal flag. Mm-hmm. One sword is the spiritual power, meaning that he has the right to dictate the religious belief of every man on earth. Mm-hmm. The second key is his right, called the temporal power, is his right to rule the governments of every nation. And this is what he exercised throughout the Dark Ages. And when the Reformation happened, whole nations broke away. Germany broke away, Holland, Denmark, England, almost France, and some others. Mm-hmm. And they assumed what we would call national sovereignty today.
Sure.
So in other words, the Pope wasn't dictating terms to those governments. When that happened, in 1540, Ignatius Loyola started the Jesuit order for the purpose of restoring the temporal power of the Pope over all these Reformation nations, destroying the Protestant Reformation, and bringing the whole world back under the universal obedience and worship to the papacy.
They were the Pope's army, really?
They were his army. They're called the Light Horse of the Pope, the Light Corps, the Marine Corps, the Pope's bodyguard, the Pope's penholders. Without the Jesuit order, there is no real enforcement of the Pope's temporal power.
How many Jesuits on the planet today? In round numbers, do we know? It's not a huge number, but it's a very intense group of people.
According to Alberto Rivera, who was an ex-Jesuit who got saved, came to know Christ as his Savior, he says that it was 100,000 in his book, and he came out in 1969.
Okay. This is a hardcore group, folks, and we'll pursue this topic with Eric Jon Phelps, and lots to learn tonight. This is a real glimpse of history, the likes of which you're likely not to hear anywhere else. Vatican Assassins is the book, and we'll continue after this. Eric Jon Phelps, his book Vatican Assassins, his website VaticanAssassins.org. And for those of you who might sit back with an incredulous look on your face. You have to take this for what it's worth to you and start applying the percentages. What if 90% of what Eric says is in fact accurate? What if 50% is accurate? How does that affect you? What does that mean to you in your world? You take what you can and do with it what you will. We're going to put it out for you, though. This is a man of great scholarship who has obviously done his research. Okay. This issue of Zionists and Jews, great confusion now, of course. And when many people criticize the current affairs and policies of the Sharon government, they are immediately...
Fanatical Muslim invasion.
Wow, all right. There is some talk about, allegedly, Sharon would like to move out all the Palestinians, push them across the Jordan. Just clear them out.
Well,
that wouldn't make sense with what you're saying, though.
No.
Because it would end the agitation.
Well, it would end the agitation, that's correct. But we also have to remember this, that the Islamic leaders there in the Middle East, they don't want the Palestinians moving in their countries. They will not allow them in. So we see
what would your solution be? How would you enfranchise the Palestinians? They have a right under the sun to some place to call home, don't they?
Well, the Palestinians are Arabs, and their brothers are in Jordan, and Jordan is just a stone's throw away from the cities that they occupy.
They wouldn't call themselves Jordanians, though.
Pardon?
Most of them wouldn't call themselves Jordanians. They call themselves Palestinians.
Well, they can call themselves that, but again, I have to go back to the Bible and say that the Jewish people have the right to the land. Mm-hmm. God gave that to them, and it's never been reneged upon.
Okay, so Perez and Sharon, Zionists that they are, working, as you suggest, for and through the papacy,
yes,
are continuing to turn the heat up, hoping for a conflagration. I would assume. Is that what we're getting at here?
Well, what we're getting at, I believe, is that we're going to have a big conflagration, like you said, that will result in U.S. troops being stationed there near Jerusalem. Because the Dome of the Rock has to be destroyed, but it can't be destroyed by the Jewish people. They couldn't stand an Arab attack. It has to be destroyed on the old enemy of the Jesuit general, the Protestant, liberal, heretic people of the United States.
Okay. Lots to think about. Very controversial material. Fascinating reading, I guarantee you that. Vatican Assassins, the book, and my guest, Eric Jon Phelps. So Zionists are not Jews always. You don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. It's a political cadre. Is that one way to put it, Eric?
Absolutely. The Jesuits are the greatest Zionists in the world. The High Jesuits of the Fourth Vow are the authors and promoters of Zionism. They're financing Zionism through their Federal Reserve Bank.
How is it that the Zionists have gotten away for so long with jumping on anybody who criticizes them or their policies as being anti-Semitic? Anti-Semitic. That's a club they pull out and batter people with. They've been doing it for, the better part of a century now. I think those days may be coming to an end, but they've gotten away with it for a long time.
Yes, they have, and it's been too bad. I think with the most recent treason that's gone on with Shimon Peres and Yossi Beilin in '93 with beating over the old city, I think many Jewish people are waking up to the fact that the Zionist government is not good for them, and that they rule on behalf of a foreign monarch.
I have received so many emails from our Jewish listeners here and in Israel and around the world who do not agree with what's going on in their country. They feel like their country is not their country anymore, many of them.
Absolutely.
And in many ways it isn't.
No, they don't
co-opted, yeah.
They don't have any say in their government, just like we don't have any say in ours.
That's what I hear. Exactly what I hear. Same thing. Okay, now, I'm going to go back to the issue of Jerusalem, besieged and set upon by those who would throw the old shop-worn collar of anti-Semite around. To you and your background, it must look doubly absurd. People don't understand the difference between Jews, Zionists, government policy. It's very muddled and muddied. And, of course, that's the game. That's the way it's played. So go back, if you would, and explain Zionism in terms of how it is being used, in your view, to bring Jews all together so they can be, apparently, once and for all extinguished.
To answer that question, I have to go back to Ishmael and Isaac.
All right, that's a ways back, but we got time.
It will take a minute. Isaac was the natural son of Abraham. Ishmael was the son of Abraham through Hagar. The promise that God gave to Abraham went through Isaac to Jacob to his 12 sons. That promise included a land promise that you can find in Genesis 15 and Genesis 17. That land promise given to the physical descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob has never changed. So the Jewish people have a right to that land. They also have a right to be governed by their own patriotic people, which does not include the Zionist government. The Zionist government, as we know it today, was started by the Jesuits, and it is controlled by the Jesuits. Shimon Peres, for example, deeded over the old city of Jerusalem in 1993 to the Pope, according to a Time newspaper. This was utter treason to the Jewish people.
And there's supposed to be a document stating so?
Absolutely. It's easily provable. My friend Joel Bannerman, who wrote Crimes of the President about George Bush, can prove it along with Barry Chamish. So this is one of the indications that the Sharon government, the Perez, Chaim Weizmann, Ben Gurion, all of them were working for the papacy.
And
all
still are.
And still are. Just like the PLO leadership, just like Yasser Arafat. He's a Masonic, Islamic Freemason.
Is he actually a Mason?
Yes. All those Islamics there. The Hussein dynasty is Masonic. That's Saddam Hussein. The Saud dynasty is Masonic.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Right. And the Bin Laden dynasty is Masonic. And Bin Laden's mother is a Jew.
Now, that is a shock.
Isn't it? Just found that today, out a couple days ago.
How do we validate something like that?
Because it can be proven by the people that live in Israel that they knew his mother. Joel Bannerman and Barry Chamish can both prove it.
Is that why he's still alive today?
No, he's still alive because he's a creature of the CIA.
Well, he's been our boy, I know. So was Saddam Hussein and how many others. They were all on the payroll and still are on the payroll in some way.
Right, all of them since 1932 or the early 1900s when that whole fiasco was set up. It was set up by the British Empire, controlled by Freemasonry, and thus the tool of the Jesuits. They set up that whole Middle East schematic over there. Iraq, Iran.
British Petroleum, all of it. They cut the map up into pieces.
However they wanted to do it, that's right.
Yeah.
So they control both sides. That's important for us to see. And the Palestinian people, although I do not believe they have a right to that land, and they would be easily assimilated into Jordan and Syria unless we can end this agitation. They want this agitation to continue, so they want the Israelis to give up the West Bank so that there can be fighting near Jerusalem, so that in this fight that will involve American troops there, the Dome of the Rock can be destroyed, that can be blamed on America, and then America can have a jihad